Because as I said, for me it was a great surprise to see his work. Now it's something we can say different. Nowadays we see so much works that looking so alike. You know, there is a repetition of themes, a repetition of figures. We have a repetition of trends. So it's very good to see an artist working beyond the trends. It's not about trendy. It's about other things. So I was talking about the idea of new, novelty. So when we see some work like this one, and we say, whoa, this is something new. I never saw something like that before. It's a pleasure. It's a great pleasure. Jerónimo, he's a painter. Those works here are paintings, are not digital prints, for an example. My friend here asked, which makes sense. So we have works with wax, different techniques. And I would like to start this conversation asking to you, Jerónimo, how you did this transition from a more figurative painting or gesture painting, like a painting with texture, and a totally different one. How you did this transition from this more traditional, classical painting, and also why you still call those works paintings. Was like a first question I did to you. Why?
I guess for lack of a better word, we keep calling them paintings. So yeah, I was doing some, as you said, more traditional painting. I used to work with brushes and oil, and there were like a lot of colors and a lot of things happening in the canvas. And then at some point, after like maybe 10 years painting, I had this kind of crisis. Like I would look at my paintings and think, okay, they look good, but what is this all about, right? And I started like this process of deconstructing, like being really carefully thinking what was going to be in a painting and why, like asking myself the reason for something to be there. So yeah, in the beginning I was like, there's, to start with, too much color, too many colors, a lot of color conflict, which is what happens usually in abstract painting. And I started like making the palette less and less colorful, making it more and more sober. And then after that, there were still a lot of things happening with less colors, and I started like taking out elements, everything that was not supposed to be there for some reason. And then at some point, the paintings started looking like black and white skeletons of the paintings. They look kind of like the structure of what the paintings were before, but with no colors and just like marks. It was like a map of marks. And then I started getting interested in these marks and started developing more and more. Now I have like, I don't know, like maybe 50 notebooks filled with this kind of language thing that happens there. I still don't know what it is, but it's like kind of, developing a language. And when I reached that stage, what started bothering me was that there were marks in a canvas and you could clearly see the canvas, and that was something that I couldn't stop seeing the physicality of the canvas and the texture and the white color of the primed canvas. So then at that point I stopped painting, but I kept going to the studio. At that point I was sharing a studio with a good painter friend, and he was like, what the fuck are you doing here like all day and all the paintings are white and nothing happens? But yeah, I was working on the surface. I needed a proper pictorial surface that could sustain these few marks that were happening. So yeah, I was working with different materials, experimenting for about half a year, not making one mark, no colors, nothing. until I arrived to, not this, but yeah, this, something like that one, that's canvas. It looks like something else, but yeah, there's a lot of layers and a lot of sanding. And then what happens there is that you can make marks, and your sight doesn't stop at the surface. It's kind of like it's like blurry and almost non-physical in a way, so you can kind of see through. And then I became really interested in that idea that you can actually read a painting not only from left to right and from up to bottom, but also kind of read it through the layers. And yeah, I guess that's kind of like a quick way to put like these last 6 or 7 years of painting. Yes.
And you make your own painting, no? All the materials, everything, you prepare everything, no? From zero.
Yeah,
The
now,
pigments.
at that point my studio became kind of like a old style painter laboratory. I buy the minerals, the binders, prepare the canvases there in the studio. I don't use industrial gesso and I don't use industrial paint. I buy the mediums, pigments, and do everything like a very old school. But then again, I paint everything with machines. So it's like this weird combination between very old techniques and new ways of applying it. In most of the paintings you see here, there's no contact. Everything is painted with air. But there's also chiaroscuro techniques that come from Baroque painting. So there's these very disparate references that come together. I guess maybe that's why we can still call it painting, right? Because it's there's the history of painting, and I think it's important to be conscious that when you're painting, you're part of a very long tradition that spans for thousands of years. And if you're paying attention to all these things, then whatever is going to happen is going to be part of that line.
And all the idea of composition, now there is a composition, so you're also aware about the empty spaces and have this balance between figures.
Mm-hmm.
You don't work with images. Now we have this talk. This is very interesting also now. You are not interested in images. So it's not about image. You're not creating images.
Yeah, I think painting has this double nature. One part of painting is image, and another part is presence. And when I started doing less and less, when I was telling that story before, it was a point where almost nothing was happening. There were very few marks. Now I'm going back to do more things in painting. But yeah, at that point I realized that when you're dealing with very few imagery, very few images, visual things happening, you deal more with the presence part of of what painting is. That's something I call invisible work, which is the things you do in the studio that somehow leave marks, somehow they're there, but it's not something that could be translated in a photograph. And yes, I think that's probably the difference between painting and image making. I mean, we see images, millions of images every day, and I think painting deals with images, but in a very different way. You're staring at a thing for maybe weeks or months, and I think that's not something you can consume in a microsecond.
No.
That's why maybe my paintings don't translate very well in photographs. But
Exactly. So we have this physical. Now we have a physical relation with the work. No? There is a sensorial thing, element maybe. No?
Yeah.
And then could you talk a little bit about the notion of ambiguity? Because you're very interested in that, no? The ambiguity of your work.
Ambiguity, I guess, is a big thing.
It's a big issue. No?
in my practice. I think it's in the beginning. It was only in the marks. I wanted to as you can see, there's a lot of drawing is a big part of my practice, and I started thinking of what happens with drawing when you're not drawing anything. because since the very beginning, when you start drawing, we all start drawing when we're like what, 2 or 3, and your mom asks you, "What are you drawing?" Is this a fridge? That was my first drawing that I remember. I like to draw our fridge. But yeah, they ask you. I love food. I still have that thing. But yeah, since you start drawing, you're always drawing something. So yeah, my practice now is involved with what happens with drawing when you're not drawing anything. So when it starts looking like something, I stop and I jump to the next thing. So that's why maybe there's this like sense of interruption in all of the marks. Sorry, I forgot the question.
About ambiguity, no?
Ambiguity, yeah. So yeah, there's this ambiguity in the signs, and then I started thinking about, I wanted to have this ambiguity also in the materials. In this show you will see there's some paintings are acrylic on canvas, some of them are, one is a silk screen with wax on top, there's encaustic, there's resins, but when you look at them, they're not easy to, you're like, is this the resin, the photograph, and so yeah, that material ambiguity also interests me. And also the color, like keeping the color in a place that is not one color or other, like in a place you couldn't define it or name it. And yeah, not deciding if this is gonna be this or that. I read it once. I think it was John Baldessari who said that there's only one question in art. It's always the same, and it's why this and not that. that's the question. So I kind of keep it in an in between place where it's not this or that, and then I don't have to decide.
But talking about in between and also about unfinished drawings or drawings that looks like, unfinished or something, we discussed also a lot about the notion of failure now. Mm-hmm. Failing. Yeah. Failing as a process. Failing as method maybe? What do you think about failure now? How important is...
I love failure.
Control the failure or not?
No, I think we're very lucky to be able to work in a field in which failure is not necessarily a bad thing. No one will ask for answers, so we can just be comfortable with questions and not answers. And yeah, I think that's how life works, right? Life is about the answers you ask, and you rarely get that. Yeah, the questions you ask, and you rarely get answers. So yeah, I think it's a privilege, and it's important because there's not many disciplines that work with this, that can work in within a field of like just ignorance and uncertainty and ambiguity. And I think that's where there's a place for learning.
Absolutely.
There's undefined things or things that are not known. So for me, it's about making the field of not knowing bigger, and to be able to fail in a better, more complex ways.
Yeah. We're talking a lot also now about the notion of failure in daily basis, nowadays, daily life. Now, we're not allowed to fail. It's something bad. Error, we must be perfect. Mostly. But in arts, especially contemporary arts, not all not all languages, not all supports, not all techniques, but mostly we can fail. And when you fail, you just start something new. Fail means a new possibility. So yeah, it's not about engineering. Yeah, if you're constructing a something, a bridge, you cannot fail.
Yeah, no one's gonna die.
Yeah,
Make a bad
exactly.
painting.
No, not at all, not at all. And then we're gonna have something new and new,
No, and
new
also I think
possibilities.
there's a reason for that because there's. I don't think you can learn from doing things right.
Right.
Like if you do what you know how to do, then there's no. Like what's the. Where's the thing happening? And I think especially in this show, there's a lot of things that happened by mistake because I was starting to work with with new materials. I mean, not new materials. Some materials are like they have been using them for 1,000 years, but new for me. And yeah, always looking for this like awkwardness, like using a new material, putting it there, and trying to get somewhere, and it goes wrong, and it goes in a different direction, and that opens up new ways of thinking or of making. And yeah, I'm really interested about that.
You're very well aware to lose control, huh? You're
Yeah,
aware
you have
of
to
losing
be very
control.
controlled in order to lose
To
control.
lose control, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
because it's really easy to just start making, get to this muddy nonsense area. And for me, it's actually important. I mean, this can look like nothing, but for me, it's important that it makes sense in relation to the other paintings around and in relation to itself. Like you create a framework in which you can like have some chaos, but that chaos has to make sense.
Absolutely.
In a weird way that I wouldn't know how to define, but yeah, some of them really fail, like in a bad way, in a way that is not gonna make it to the gallery. That happens a lot. Like I have 3 paintings, and I'm like, yeah, this one is working, and then you have another one that it could look almost the same for a foreign eye, but I'm like, no, that one's not working.
But you told me that one is here by chance, no? Or opaque by
That one was
chance.
supposed to be. I wanted it to be shiny. For my last show, I was making these reflective pieces that were to be. I installed them in a 16th century convent in Mexico in the desert. Beautiful Gothic architecture, and I came up with this idea of making obsidian mirror-like pieces that would contain the architecture in its reflection. They would put in the cloister, so they would change with the different times of the day and different lights. And this is one of the first ones I did for that show, and the surface was all shitty, so it wasn't reflecting right. And I started sanding it in the hope that I could sanding it good enough to be able to polish it and then have a reflection, and it didn't happen. And then at some point I was like, it actually looks good when it's not shiny. It's more connected to the other ones. So the good shiny ones made it to the convent, and this one that failed made it to this show. It wouldn't have made sense here to have one reflective painting. So I think, yeah, that one's there because it failed.
Absolutely. Well, I have just one more question. I don't know if you want to ask Jerónimo, or anyway, now we're going to stay here for a while after this talk. So I think it's very interesting to know how is your process in the studio. You told me now about the relation of your body now with the canvas, and how you make a kind of composition in your studio before starting.
Yeah, I like to work without a plan, and I want the paintings to look as careless as I can, at least in the composition and the marks. So a few years ago, I realized that the only way for me to do that is working in 15, 20 paintings at the same time. And so in that way, I can start with one thing, and then when I'm stuck, I just move to the next one. And you also get this freedom of not really caring, because if one painting doesn't work, you have other 19 paintings that can still work. So that's like a trick that I do to my brain, so I don't pay attention and give importance to one painting. And so since I discovered that some years ago, I've been working in a lot of paintings at the same time, jump from one to the other. And then there's this the conversation between them, which is like one of the. I've been thinking about the syntactic element in the paintings, but also the title of the show comes from this thinking about this sort of conversation that they have between them. Sometimes, let's say, this painting is stuck at some point and it's lacking something here, but I don't know what it is, and then I jump to the next one, and then something happens there, and it's like if that painting was telling this one, what I have is what you need there, and then it they kind of inform each other, and there's this feeling that they're like alive and talking. So yeah, that's one of the things I thought of when I was thinking of the title for this show.
And can you tell us a little bit about your references? You know, in arts and in general, arts, culture, philosophy. Now there are many, no?
Yeah. Woof. Yeah, 5 minutes. That's. I don't know. I don't think I have many painting references at this point. When I was learning, I would have a lot. I would, like all painters, we copy other painters, and that's a process of filtering information and images and trying to find your own voice. But nowadays, I think maybe I get more things from, I don't know, musical theory, science, papers, concrete poetry, the experimental music, experimental film that you were talking about. Yeah, that's photography, maybe painting, but very old, like some cave painting, petroglyphs.
Chinese now, ancient Chinese rolls,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like these rolls. Yeah, those are really interesting because the idea that the Chinese have about how to represent space is not like the Euclidean way we have here in the Western world. Like we have this idea of a frame and like a little window where you can see everything framed with a perspective, but they have this thing that's very long and you can never see the whole image. So it's about either you walking through or moving the roll, and then the landscape never ends. And that's something closer to how we actually experience the world and experience space and being in a space. So yeah, in this show I don't have that many big paintings, but that's something I've been working on in the last years, making paintings that are way bigger than your body, so you only can grasp them, like small parts of them. You can rarely see the whole thing. I mean, it's hard to, you need to walk. You need to walk and recorrer, ¿cómo se dice? Se me fue la palabra.
Recorrer. Wow.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, just you have to move in order to be able to perceive the painting. And that's
The thing.
and yes, maybe.
Yeah. I know. Would you like to ask something or say something? Jerónimo, yeah, or then we can continue. You?
Yeah, the sketches you mentioned, you're not trying to sketch anything specific, but
Yeah.
in the end, each one student has a theme. Do you notice that happening from your end, or is just something that just happens out of coincidence?
Yeah, I think that I give chance a big space. So yeah, when I'm sketching, it's never a sketch for one painting in the traditional sense. I think I've never done one sketch and then one painting that looks like the sketch. But yeah, that's like a warming up thing that I do usually every day when I come to the studio. And then some things come up in these pages, some elements that are always there, like repeating, and there's like a dialogue between shapes that some make sense and some not. And those are the ones that, in a kind of unconscious way, end up making it to the bigger paintings. But yeah, it's never a literal translation of the things that are happening in the notebook. And yeah, I try to make them happen without me directing too much or thinking too much about it. So,
but how would you like the surface to feel, or what what are you trying to reach with this feeling that it's close because the porosity is gone, but it's also very organic in certain occasions, and it has kind of another dimensions and other layers that work differently. What's going on with that materiality?
Well, it's a sensory thing. I think we feel art with our whole body, and I think we should have that part of. I think it's another kind of intelligence that it would be nice to have more and more trained. And I don't really know what I'm looking for, but I know when I found something, when people tell, like many times people have told me that they want to touch them, or even that they want to lick them or bite them. That's a success for me. if it makes you want to lick it, that's the right direction.
Could you maybe talk a little about your mark making? Because at first glance it seems like long exposure photos done with flashlights in a fog, but there is some variation. There's some fineness to the lines occasionally, but it seems you were more orienting towards creating a spatial. And I know you come from a sculpture background, so having that as well perhaps plays in.
Well, that when that started happening, because people started telling me that they look like some kind of like photographic, like experimental 20th century photography. And at the beginning I was like, no, that's something I'm not sure that I like, because when I started using airbrush, I don't like airbrush painting. That's something that, like this strong deluxe thing that the painting is trying to look like a photograph. But I was like, okay, as long as it looks like a photograph of nothing, maybe that that works. And yeah, it's very simple marks, and painting for me is about, as I said before, one thing is about presence and also about light. And I think that's something that painting shares with experimental photography, is just light just happening there. And so yeah, I guess they're realistic paintings in that sense, and yeah, now I'm okay with that.
You talk about your process and how you start.
Uh-huh.
How do you end?
That's the hardest thing for a painter. Yeah, sometimes when I teach, that's the most difficult part, like telling them, like teaching people where to stop. Because usually every painting at some point is good. And the problem is that you overdo it.
How do you decide that your work is when you start presenting or close, how do you decide that that's done?
It just feels right. And that takes many years. And making so many paintings that go in the wrong direction, and then you start like just knowing where to stop. But what I was saying before, like working in 20 paintings at the same time, that helps, because then you don't overdo it. When you realize that you get to a place that it's good, you just stop and move to the next one, and then you give yourself time. It's about that thing, I guess. Yeah, it's about not doing. It's about having one painting that's already looking kind of good. Just leave it there, look at it for like 1 or 2 months. Maybe make one little mark, just see what it needs, what it's asking for. And if after a couple months it's not asking for anything else, I'm like, okay, maybe you're ready to go. Yeah. Okay.
Muy bien, ¿no? Muy bien, yeah.
Thank you all for coming.
So thank you. Enjoy. Media hora. Okay. Dankeschön.